Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Western Flavors. Before we get into our new episode, let's recap the thrilling, high stakes events from our last story. The episode focused on the Resistance's first man on the inside, a terrified security guard named Marcus. In a tense and dangerous mission, Marcus successfully delivered a cryptic, coded message to a captive Caleb Odell. Inside his bleak cell, Caleb brilliantly deciphered the code, realizing it was the coordinates to a secret location. The episode ended on a triumphant cliffhanger as Ty's team received a single word from Marcus. Confirmed. Hope, for the first time, was ignited. If you're enjoying this new season, please take a second to hit that like button and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Now today, having the location is only the first step. Ty and his team must discover the true and terrifying nature of the prison that holds their friend. The single word on the screen was a beacon in the darkness. Confirmed, it was the most beautiful word Ty had read in a very long time. The oppressive, heavy atmosphere of despair that had filled the line shack for days had been shattered, replaced by a new and electric energy. It was the energy of hope. Tim let out a low, satisfied laugh, a sound of a pure and primal relief.
I'll be damned. The kid actually did it.
Shane was already at the laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. I'm plugging the coordinates into the satellite map now. Let's see what we're looking at. Ty and Tim crowded around him, their shoulders pressed together as they stared at the screen. A map of the Alberta foothills filled the display, a familiar patchwork of green and brown. A small red pin dropped onto a remote and completely empty section of the wilderness. Okay, I've got it pinpointed. It's exactly where you said, deep in the backcountry, miles from any marked road. He zoomed in. The image became clearer, showing a dense forest of pine and aspen, a winding unnamed river, and a series of rugged, rocky hills, and in the center of it all, the red pin, on nothing. The initial triumphant energy in the room began to deflate, replaced by a new and frustrating confusion.
So what the hell is out there? There's nothing. Is he keeping him in a tent? A cave? It makes no sense.
He paced the small room, his frustration returning.
We're wasting time sitting here staring at a map. We load up the truck, we grab our gear, and we go take a look, a quiet scout, see what's what with our own eyes.
Ty shook his head, his own gaze still fixed on the screen, his mind working, processing the new problem.
No.
The word was quiet, but it was absolute.
That's a mistake. It's what Nathan would expect us to do. A blind charge. This whole area for miles around this point. It's going to be his territory. He'll have it monitored. Drones, seismic sensors, hidden cameras on the game trails. If we just drive out there, we'll be walking right into an ambush. He'll know we're coming before we're within 10 miles of the place. We can't go in blind.
He's right. If there's something out there, it's hidden for a reason, and it's going to be protected. We need to know what we're walking into before we take a single step. Tim threw his hands up in the air, his patience worn thin.
And how are we supposed to do that? We can't exactly call the county planning office and ask them who owns a secret evil lair in the middle of nowhere.
No, we can't.
A slow, calculating smile touched Ty's lips.
But she can.
He looked at Tim and then at Shane.
We have an ally, a partner with resources we don't have. It's time to see what she can really do.
He walked over to the secure, encrypted laptop that Val had provided. He opened a messaging app, his fingers moving with a new and confident speed. The Ghost Protocol was about more than just hiding. It was about using their new assets. He composed a short and precise message. Tim and Shane watched over his shoulder as he typed,
Coordinates received from asset. Need positive identification of all structures and registered property ownership at this location. High priority. The clock is ticking.
He hit send. The message disappeared into the ether, a silent digital request sent to their new and very unpredictable partner in this war. The three of them stood there, their faces illuminated by the pale glow of the screen, staring at the single, anonymous red dot on the satellite map. They had a location, but they had no idea what it was. They were standing at the edge of a dark and unknown new battlefield, and their only guide was the one person in the world they had every reason not to trust. The message was sent, and then there was only the waiting. The silence in the line shack, which had moments before been filled with the energy of a new plan, now became a heavy, suffocating thing. Hours began to crawl by with an agonizing slowness. Night deepened outside, and the small, dusty room felt more and more like a cage. Tim paced the worn floorboards, his patience, a famously finite resource, having been completely exhausted. He stopped and glared at the silent dark screen of the secure laptop as if his anger alone could force a response from it.
This is a waste of time. She's playing us. I knew it. Right now, she's probably sitting in her fancy office, laughing her head off while she makes a nice anonymous call to the authorities. She'll give them our location, collect her reward, and get rid of us and price all in one go.
Shane, who had been meticulously cleaning their newly acquired untraceable gear, looked up, his own expression a mask of a worried tension. Val's smart, but I don't think she's a traitor. Ty's right. Price is a threat to her, too. She's probably just being careful, making sure her own tracks are covered before she sends anything.
Or she's setting a trap. I don't trust her, Ty. I never have, and I never will.
Ty stood by the single grimy window, staring out into the impenetrable darkness of the woods. He had not moved for over an hour. He was a statue of a tense and patient resolve.
She'll come through.
His voice was quiet, but it held a certainty that was a stark contrast to the room's anxious energy.
This is bigger than her feud with our family. This is about her own survival. And Val Stanton is, above all else, a survivor. She knows what's at stake.
Even as he said the words, a cold knot of doubt was tightening in his own stomach. He was betting everything on his own psychological assessment of their oldest enemy. If he had read her wrong, if Tim was right, then they were not just back to square one. They were lambs, waiting for the slaughter. Another hour passed. The fire in the stove burned down to a bed of glowing red embers. The coffee in their mugs was a cold, bitter sludge. The hope that had ignited in the room just a few hours ago was beginning to die, starved of the oxygen of any new information. And then, a soft electronic chime from the laptop broke the silence. It was so sudden, so unexpected, that all three men jumped as if a gunshot had gone off. They scrambled to the table, their bodies a tangle of a desperate and hopeful urgency. Shane's fingers flew across the trackpad, opening the secure messaging app. A single new message was there, from Val. Shane began to read it aloud, his voice a low and steady murmur. Okay, it's an intelligence report. She got it. It says, asset confirmed. Location is a decommissioned Cold War-era Federal Communications bunker, codenamed Cerberus. The name alone was a chilling thing, a reference to the three-headed hound of hell. The line shack, which had felt so secure moments before, now felt fragile and exposed.
A military bunker? What the hell are we dealing with here?
Shane continued to read, his own voice now laced with a new and dawning sense of a profound disbelief. The property was sold in a private federal auction 10 years ago. The current registered owner is a Price Shell Corporation, a company called Northgate Biologicals. Ty's head snapped up, his eyes locking with Shane's.
Northgate Biologicals. That's what Marcus said. The company that moved Scott and Peter. They're all there. He's got all of them in one place.
The small piece of good news was immediately overshadowed by the final terrible lines of the report. Shane's voice dropped to an almost whisper as he read them. The listed purpose of the facility is secure data storage, but her private intel suggests the property is heavily fortified. Private security, electronic countermeasures, seismic sensors on the perimeter, and Val's final note. It just says, do not approach. This is a fortress, not a ranch. The message ended. The three of them stood in the flickering lamplight, staring at the screen, the full and terrifying reality of their situation finally crashing down on them. They were not up against a rich man with a few hired thugs. They were up against a man with his own private and military-grade prison. Tim's earlier and seemingly foolish desire to just go take a look now seemed like a suicidally naive fantasy. They would have been walking into a meat grinder. The hope that had so recently filled the room was gone, replaced by a cold, hard, and seemingly insurmountable dread. They looked at the satellite image on the screen, at the innocent-looking patch of a remote green forest. But they were no longer seeing a forest. They were seeing a fortress. They were seeing Cerberus, and they had absolutely no idea how to get inside. The final words of Val's report hung in the air of the line shack like a death sentence. A fortress, the hope that had so recently ignited in the room, was extinguished, crushed under the weight of this new and seemingly insurmountable reality. They were no longer just outmanned and outgunned. They were facing an enemy that was, for all intents and purposes, invincible. Tim sank down onto one of the rickety bunks, the fight completely drained out of him. He ran a hand over his face, his expression one of a profound and weary defeat.
So that's it, then. It's over. We can't get in there. It's a damn military bunker. We'd need a tank to even scratch the paint.
Shane was still staring at the laptop, scrolling through the technical specifications Val had included in her report. His face was pale in the screen's glow. It's worse than that. She says the outer perimeter is lined with subterranean seismic sensors. They'll feel our footsteps before we're even through the trees. The walls are 3-foot thick reinforced concrete, and the whole thing has its own independent power and water supply. It's designed to withstand a direct nuclear strike. He looked up at Ty, his eyes wide with the full and terrifying scope of their problem. She's right. It's a fortress. We can't get in. Ty stood over the map, his own mind a chaotic swirl of dead ends. Every plan he had started to form, every desperate strategy had just been obliterated. He felt a familiar and unwelcome coldness seeping into his bones, the feeling of utter, absolute helplessness. It was the same feeling he had had in the White Room in Ontario, the feeling of being in a cage from which there was no escape. For a long, silent moment, the only sound in the room was the low, sad moan of the wind outside. They were 3 men, huddled in a broken-down shack, who had just been told that their mission was not just dangerous, it was impossible. It was in that moment of a shared and crushing despair that the laptop chimed again. The soft electronic sound made them all jump. A new message from Val. They stared at the notification on the screen, a mixture of a dread and a desperate, foolish hope. They were almost afraid to look, half expecting a final, pitying message telling them to give up. It was Ty who finally reached out and opened it. The message was short, and it was not a message of surrender. Every fortress has a crack. You just have to know where to look. Attached is a gift from an old friend in the Federal Archives who owed me a very, very big favor. Use it well. Below the text, a large data file was downloading, the progress bar filled with an agonizing slowness. Finally, it was complete. Shane clicked it open, and the screen was filled with the intricate and impossibly detailed architectural and engineering blueprints of the Cerberus communications bunker. The despair in the room did not just lift, it was shattered, obliterated by a sudden and explosive new wave of a frantic and dangerous kind of hope. It was the hope of a long shot, the hope of a miracle. The 3 of them crowded around the small laptop screen, their faces illuminated by the glowing blue-white lines of the schematics. It was all there, every corridor, every reinforced door, every power conduit, every communication line, every security station. They were no longer staring at an impenetrable fortress. They were staring at its secrets. They were looking at the devil's own blueprint. The energy in the room was transformed. They were no longer defeated soldiers. They were strategists. They were planners. They were hunters who had just been handed a map to their prey's den.
Okay.
His voice was a low and intense whisper, full of a new and powerful purpose.
Okay, we have a map. Now we just need to find a way in.
They stared at the screen, at the complex and terrifying maze that held their friends captive. The task was still monumental. It was still a suicide mission, but it was no longer impossible. The initial triumphant surge of hope that had come with the discovery of the blueprints slowly began to curdle into a new and more profound kind of despair. For hours, the 3 men huddled around the laptop, their faces illuminated by the intricate, glowing lines of the schematics. The fire in the stove had long since died, and a deep pre-dawn chill had settled into the small shack, a perfect mirror for the cold, hard reality of the puzzle in front of them. The blueprints were not a map to victory. They were a detailed and terrifying testament to their own impossible situation. The bunker was a masterpiece of a paranoid and military-grade design, a subterranean fortress, a concrete tomb designed to be completely and utterly impenetrable. Tim, a man of a direct and physical action, was the first to voice their shared hopelessness. He traced a thick, calloused finger across the main entrance on the screen.
Main entrance is a death trap. It's a single, recessed choke point. Reinforced steel doors, biometric scanners, and interlocking guard posts on either side with overlapping fields of fire. The cargo bay is just as bad. It's a suicide run. There's no way to get in that way without an army.
Shane, the more technically minded of the group, was focused on the bunker's infrastructure. He had been tracing the power conduits and the communication lines, his expression growing more and more grim. I was thinking we could cut the power, but it's a communications bunker. It's designed to stay online through anything. The plans show a primary generator here, but it's got 3 redundant backup systems, each with its own independent and very well-protected fuel supply. We could knock out the main power for a few minutes maybe, but the backups would kick in before we even got to the first interior door. Same with the comms. The whole place is a Faraday cage. It's impossible to isolate. They were looking at a perfect and seamless defense. Every door was a death trap. Every system was redundant. Every possible angle of attack had been anticipated and countered, decades before they had even been born. The blueprints had not given them a key. They had just shown them in excruciating detail how thick the walls of the prison truly were. Ty had been quiet for a long time, his eyes scanning a different set of the plans. Not the main architectural layouts, but the older secondary schematics, the HVAC systems, the plumbing, the maintenance tunnels. He was not looking for a door. He was looking for a forgotten passage, a crack in the foundation. He was thinking not like a soldier, but like a prisoner, like a man who knows that every cage has a flaw in its design.
Wait a minute. Shane, can you pull up the sub-level 3 schematic? Not the 90s refit, the original one. From the 1960s build.
Shane, a look of a weary confusion on his face, navigated through the files and pulled up the older, simpler blueprint. Ty leaned in close to the screen, his finger tracing a small, almost invisible detail in the far corner of the plan. It was a thin, dotted line, labeled with a faded technical script.
There! What's that?
It's an old exhaust vent. Shaft number 7. It's a dead end, Ty. The updated plans from the 90s refit show it as permanently sealed with 2 feet of concrete at the surface level. It doesn't go anywhere.
A dead end, just like the rest of this plan.
But Ty wasn't listening. A new and dangerous idea was beginning to form in his mind, an idea born of his own unique and terrible experience.
That's what the plans say. His voice was a low, intense whisper. TY. But what do contractors do when they're over budget and running behind schedule? They cut corners. And what's the one corner you can always cut? The one that nobody will ever see. The one you're about to seal up behind a brand new wall.
He looked up at them, his eyes shining with a new and wild kind of hope.
They didn't fill that entire 200-foot vertical shaft with concrete. I'd bet my life on it. It would have taken too much time, too much money. They would have just sealed the entrance on the surface and the exit point in the sublevel. The shaft itself, it's probably still there. A hollow, forgotten, and completely unmonitored tube of metal and rock that runs right through the heart of the entire facility.
Tim and Shane stared at him, a look of a stunned and dawning comprehension on their faces. It was an insane, desperate gamble.
You want to bet our lives on the hope that some contractor 60 years ago was lazy?
Yes, Ty said, his voice now a firm and unwavering declaration. Ty, it's a long shot. It's a crazy shot. But it's the only one we've got. They'll be watching the doors. They'll be watching the fences. They'll be watching the power lines. They will not be watching a forgotten hole in the ground that their own updated plans tell them doesn't even exist anymore.
The 3 of them looked back at the screen, at the small, insignificant, dotted line on the old blueprint. It was no longer a dead end. It was a path, a treacherous and almost certainly lethal one. But it was the only one they had. The discovery of the ventilation shaft was a single tiny match struck in a vast and overwhelming darkness. It was not yet a fire, but it was hope. A desperate and wildly improbable kind of hope. For a few triumphant moments, the 3 men allowed themselves to believe that they had found a way, that the impossible mission was now merely improbable. But it was Tim who, with a lifetime of a hard-won and often cynical pragmatism, brought them crashing back down to earth. He stood up from the table and began to pace, the same restless, angry energy from before returning, but this time it was tempered with a new and frustrating dose of reality.
Okay, it's a long shot, but it's a shot, I'll give you that. But it's not a job for 3 guys with a pickup truck and a bag of cash. This is a military bunker, Taya. We're not breaking into a barn. We'd need climbing gear to even get down that shaft. We'd probably need some kind of explosives to get through the seals at the bottom. We need someone who can handle their security systems once we're inside. We need a real team, people with specific skills. And last time I checked, we are fresh out of an army.
Shane nodded in agreement, his own mind already running through the logistical nightmare of their new plan. He's right. This isn't a 3-man job. It's a 10-man job. And we don't know 10 people we can trust with this. One wrong word to the wrong person, and the whole thing is blown. Price will know we're coming, and he'll move them. Or worse. They were right. Ty knew they were right. The brief, beautiful flicker of hope was threatening to be extinguished by the cold, hard realities of their own limitations. He looked at the blueprint on the screen, at the tiny dotted line that represented their only path forward. It was a path they were not equipped to take, not alone.
You're right.
He said the words quietly, his own gaze thoughtful, distant.
We do need a team, but it can't be just anyone. It has to be people we can trust with our lives. People who have a personal and powerful stake in this fight. It has to be family.
He walked over to the small pile of burner phones that Val had provided. He picked one up, his decision made. There was a risk, a huge one. Every call, every new person brought into the circle was another potential leak, another potential point of failure. But the risk of doing nothing, of trying to do this alone, was a greater one. He found the number he was looking for, a secure, encrypted contact for the Vancouver hideout. He hit the call button, and the small room was filled with the tense electronic sound of a phone ringing 1,000 miles away. He put it on speaker. It was answered on the second ring. The voice that came through was a welcome and familiar sound. It was Ashley.
Ty, is that you? Is everything okay? We've been so worried. Did you find them?
Her voice was a frantic, anxious torrent of questions.
We're okay, Ashley. We're safe.
He took a deep breath.
And yes, we found him. We found Caleb.
A sharp, audible gasp of a pure and profound relief came from the other end of the line.
Oh my God, is he all right? Where is he?
He's alive, but he's in a bad place, Ashley. A very bad place. And we have a plan to get him out.
He paused, the weight of the question he was about to ask settling over him.
But it's dangerous. Incredibly dangerous. And we can't do it alone. We need help. We need you.
The silence on the other end of the line was a long and considering one. But it was not a silence of hesitation. It was the silence of a soldier processing a mission briefing. Ashley Stanton had saved him and Caleb once before from a hell in the Alaskan wilderness. She was not a person who backed down from a fight. When she finally spoke, her voice was not the anxious, worried voice from before. It was the calm, steady, and resolute voice of the woman who had rescued them. The voice of a warrior.
Tell me what you need. I'm on my way.
The simple and absolute declaration was a promise, a commitment. Ty closed his eyes, a wave of a pure and grateful relief washing over him. He was no longer just the leader of a small and desperate band of fugitives. He was the commander of a real and capable team. The rescue was no longer just a desperate hope. It was now an operation, and it was about to begin.